In California, an 18-year-old is accused of killing Ennis Cosby. In Nevada, an 18-year-old is accused of raping and murdering a 7-year-old girl in a casino restroom. In New York, two 15-year-olds are accused of savagely slashing to death a middle-aged man at midnight in Central Park. In New Hampshire today, a woman appeals her conviction in the murder of her husband, a killing carried out by her 16-year-old lover and two other teenagers. In New Jersey, an 18-year-old girl gives birth during her high school prom, then allegedly dumps the newborn in a bathroom trash can before returning to the dance floor. In Connecticut today, Alex Kelly is convicted of raping a teenage neighbor when he was 18 years old. And in New York this morning, Amy Fisher is denied parole. She, of course, is the then 17-year-old Long Island Lolita convicted of shooting Mary Jo Buttafuoco, her lover's wife, in the head. Hi, everybody. I'm Geraldo Rivera. Take a look at this chilling statistic. An FBI report shows that the number of murders committed by adults between 85 and 95 was down by 30%. The number of murders committed by teenagers skyrocketed an unbelievable 145%. James Curtis, what the hell is going on?
It's troubling, isn't it? It's absolutely troubling. It's the kind of thing that our kids are apparently out of control, in need of a lot of direction, and we have to make a hard decision between locking them up, trying them, prosecuting them, putting them to death even at a younger and younger age, putting all our money in building prisons, or putting it on the front end and trying to do something about a more basic solution and try to figure out what the problem is and fix it.
Jack Levin, are these sociopaths? Are these kids who are acting out because of TV? What is it?
Well, you know, I think a lot of teenagers I would call temporary sociopaths. You know, they'll do something hideous at the age of 16 that they wouldn't dream of doing if you can get them to the age of 26. But I don't think it's necessarily that the kids are out of control. I think adults are out of control. They're too busy doing other things besides taking care of children. They have let a whole generation of youngsters raise themselves, fend for themselves. We're all working. Everybody is out there in the labor force, but who's watching the kids?
Before you meet our other top-notch experts, when we talk about this, juvenile crime rate, particularly the homicide rate, a guilty verdict today in a crime committed by someone who was a teenager at the time. Alex Kelly wept bitterly and cried out in protest after being convicted of raping his 16-year-old virgin neighbor in 1986. His victim, now a 27-year-old married woman, allowed her husband to express her profound feelings of vindication. WNBC's Michael Hale reports.
For 8 years, Alex Kelly was an international fugitive in Europe, living the life of a ski bum. He ran away from his accuser and any chance for a jury to hear the facts. Now a jury has decided Alex Kelly is guilty of raping a 16-year-old neighbor he had offered a ride home from a house party in 1986. The victim's husband broke the family silence.
I'm grateful that the jury was able to focus on the truth and hope that what I have done will help other women who have been raped to obtain justice.
Kelly reacted, "Guilty? I'm not guilty. God, I didn't do this. Why are you doing this to me?" He rocked back in his chair and he cried. He said, "I'm innocent. Can I talk to the jury?" The judge said, "Mr. Kelly, sit down." Kelly's fiancée cried, but some observers said, finally, justice.
She really is a remarkably courageous young woman. Her family's been enormously supportive, and I think she deserves tremendous accolades from all of us. And I think we would all like people to know that it can work out well when you come forward.
The now 27-year-old woman testified Kelly came onto her, pulled into a cul-de-sac, and then violently attacked and raped her in the rear of a Jeep Wagoneer on a cold February 1986 night. In the first trial, the woman said Kelly choked with one hand and lowered the backrest of the rear seat with his other hand. The defense showed that was nearly impossible. The issue hung the jury, 4 to convict, 2 to acquit. The accuser wanted a second trial, and this time she told the jury what she had told police 11 years ago, that Kelly removed his hand from her throat and used both hands to lower the backrest of the seat. The defense said the woman was lying. The second jury asked for a ton of testimony readback. The last was the accuser's, and it included the ride home. This jury seemed determined to reach a verdict. It worked through its lunch hour yesterday and today. The knock on the door came at 1:55 this afternoon announcing a verdict, not a deadlock. Kelly looked nervous, rattled, scared. The jury of 3 women and 3 men decided Kelly, the former Darien High School wrestling star, is guilty of raping his neighbor.
Michael Hill, thank you. Kelly's $1 million bail was immediately revoked. Prosecutors asked that he continue to be held without bail, citing, of course, his flight to Europe just before his scheduled first trial a decade ago. Mickey Sherman was Kelly's attorney at that time. He joins us on the phone now. Mickey, it's no surprise, is it, that his bail was revoked?
No, and as I understand it, didn't the judge reconsider and allow him out on bail?
Is he out on bail now?
I think that's what I heard from someone else, that in fact he is out on bail. It's a $1 million bond, which is certainly an enormous bond. This is not a murder. I'm not minimizing the aspect of rape.
You're not going to fire up your travel agency again, are you?
No, I don't think so. This is a situation that really divided our community. It's been a source of controversy and a lot of concern, and emotions really ran high.
Do you think that the jury reached a just verdict?
Well, you know, you're definitely asking the wrong guy about that. I've obviously been in his camp for 10 years, so you know, I would like to have seen Alex for bail here. But you know, justice is something that only the jury really can decide, and you know, they're going to have to live with that verdict for many years.
We are confirming he is out on bail. How much? Find out.
$1 million.
Yeah, the same million?
Yeah. Don't you think $1 million is enough?
Tighter restrictions on house arrest? All right, all right. When is he going to be sentenced? Do we know? Do you know, Mick?
I would imagine about 6 weeks down the line.
July 24th, confirmed.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, even with the flight, don't you think the flight under your watch, Mickey, had a lot to do with his conviction today?
I frankly don't. You know, the mystery will be over when we see the interviews with the jurors on Good Morning America and every other show, probably. But I frankly don't think that that's going to be a big part of this thing. I think this is a conventional one-on-one rape. I'm not saying garden variety to minimize it, but it's he said, she said, and the jury's going to believe one or the other.
But the fact that he left had everything to do with it.
I think it's very interesting. In fact,
hold on, Jeff.
I think that we've gotten to the point where women start being believed. I mean, frankly, I believe that when Alex Kelly said, "I'm not guilty," he probably thought he wasn't.
That he wasn't?
He thought he wasn't.
I know what you mean.
But that doesn't mean that he wasn't. I mean, he thought that behavior was perfectly reasonable. It seems to me the jury said it's not. In fact, it's a terrible crime and ought to be punished.
You're saying
everyone agrees it's a terrible crime. The question is, did he commit it?
And the answer obviously is yes.
Well, the flight,
Mickey, I think, had everything to do with the conviction. Had he not, and certainly his parents carry some weight with this verdict, financing this excursion overseas, I mean, but for that, he would have been in a very, very different position coming before this jury.
How many countries did he visit, Mickey?
Then why didn't the first jury convict him?
How many countries did he visit?
I haven't a clue.
Wasn't it something like 43 countries?
The state introduced evidence of 43 different stamps through customs, I know. Under his own name,
under
with
his own
passport.
Right.
That's irrelevant, though. The fact that he left pending a second trial, that's the issue.
Does the name Richard Kimball mean anything to you, Jim?
That's very funny, but there's a consciousness of guilt instruction. There's a consciousness of guilt instruction having to do with flight in the rules for a reason, and this is the very reason. I think it's a great example of it.
I got to tell you, let's wait to see what the jurors say. I would bet that that's not going to play a big part. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
All right. Let me move on from Kelly, who incidentally faces a maximum of 20 years sentence on today's conviction. He also faces separate charges of sexual assault and kidnapping in an alleged attack that took place 4 days after the first rape. That's when his then attorney, Mickey Sherman, said, I don't think you can get a fair deal here. You're being tried for both rapes simultaneously.
Right, Mick? A year later.
Okay. They happened, you were saying a year later? What's a year later?
I told him that he wasn't getting a fair trial a year later when they decided to combine both trials in front of one jury, which was patently unfair, and later a judge reversed that ruling.
Okay, so he was tried on one. Do you think it would be possible to find a jury who doesn't know he's convicted now of one in the second case?
I don't think they'll ever try the second case.
You don't think?
Well, and let me just speak to this patently unfair. Trials get combined and consolidated all the time, and there's perfectly legitimate basis for doing it. I don't know the facts of this particular consolidation, but the idea of it being patently unfair to combine trials is just not accurate.
You had William Lester Suff in California.
Two different parties.
His trial had 12
happens all the time.
All combined. In your county, James.
That's absolutely right. Happens all the time. We just had serial killer William Suff combined on dozens of counts involving different individuals.
This is the guy who killed the prostitutes, then cut their right breast off.
Exactly.
And then posed them. He posed one hitchhiking, he posed another and some other obscene pose. Well, he's now facing the death penalty in
That's
San
absolutely
Quentin.
right.
I actually just interviewed him today. I should have thought
Really?
I would have brought the tape for my daytime show.
Oh.
He called me from San Quentin. It was quite extraordinary. Let me formally introduce our guest, Karen Burstein, an old friend of mine, dealt with countless juvenile cases during her time as a New York State Family Court judge. She's also a wonderful former state senator. Currently, she's a successful practicing litigation attorney. James Curtis, of course, the deputy DA in the Juvenile Crime Division of the Riverside County, California DA's office, who became known and loved by us during the Simpson saga, joins us from L.A. In D.C., this is Frank Hall. We haven't heard from Frank yet. We will. The former director of the New York City Juvenile Justice System. In addition to that, Mr. Hall has directed the corrections departments of the states of Massachusetts, Maryland, and Oregon. And in Boston tonight, my other old pal, Jack Levin, one of the nation's top experts on crime and murder, a professor of criminology at Northeastern University, where he also directs the school's program for the study of violence. There was a headline in one of the papers. I should have brought the paper. Anyway, the headline said about the prom queen who dumped her newborn in the trash can and then went back out onto the dance room floor and requested a number, and then danced to it. Everyone is horrified. How can you explain it? That's as good a title as any for this segment on juvenile justice. Stay tuned.
Have the sexual harassment, the alleged sexual assaults, have they ended?
Since I brought the lawsuit, I'd say yeah, definitely.
So when was the last time? When was the last incident?
Right before I filed the lawsuit last year.
In the middle of the year, more or less?
Around probably about April.
April?
Last year.
How many times do you allege that you have been raped in this facility?
Numerous. You know, one person does it and he tells his friends and they think it's funny and they can get away with it, and before I know it, somebody else is doing it. You know, and they never get in trouble for it, so they keep doing it.
Amy Fisher, my jailhouse interview up in Albion State Correctional Facility is a maximum security facility up near Buffalo. Big news today in the Amy Fisher case. On the one hand, her parole has been denied, and her parole for the assault on Mary Jo Buttafuoco. When she pled guilty, she was given 5 to 15. She's done 5. Her first time eligible for parole, she was turned down. They said that she was a danger or still a threat to the public safety in the community. A reason I find absolutely absurd and appallingly inaccurate. In any case, her parole has been denied. Yesterday, genetic testing on stains on a pair of Amy Fisher's underwear supports her claim that she was raped by a guard at Albion Correctional Facility, where she's been serving time for shooting and attempting to kill Mary Jo Buttafuoco. The semen matches the prison guard Bruce A. Kuttner, the fellow who split and quit his job with no notice after the lawsuit was filed by the Fisher family. He was later found working on an oil rig in Louisiana. Under current law in New York State, Karen, as you know, it is constructive rape even if she gave consent. She alleges she was forced by the guy. But if the sex happened now, it would be rape no matter whether she gave consent or not. That wasn't the law when this alleged incident took place. However, it still seems she has a pretty good claim now that the DNA matches this prison guard supervisor.
And the truth of the matter is that people who've done any work in our prisons know that as men came into women prisons, rape, in fact, sexual assault increased. And I think it's an interesting, phenomenon, because what happens is you got theoretically all these bad people, all these criminals behind bars, and then people who are hired to watch the criminals become criminals themselves. I mean, I think that really goes to the issue that we're talking about, which is that if you degrade an entire society's sense of what's appropriate, what's moral, it becomes very difficult for kids in particular, who have very little to count on, to distinguish what's really heinous from what's sort of normal.
Let me ask Frank Hall 2 tough questions. Former director of the Juvenile Justice System here in New York. She was 17 when she shot Mary Jo. She started her affair at 16 with Joey. Joey served 6 months for statutory rape. Amy Fisher's still in jail. First of all, with all of these allegations of sexual assaults behind bars, wouldn't you have transferred Amy Fisher by now certainly that the DNA test is back. Why do you think New York officials refuse to get her out of that place?
Well, Geraldo, I don't think you can speculate on an individual case, and I don't want to argue the facts of this particular case, but I think the reality of it is, you know, sexual assaults have occurred behind bars in jails and prisons. But you can't generalize and say that one incident means that this happens on a regular basis. I don't think that's the reality, but it has happened. It's happened in prisons and it's happened in jails in this country.
Jack, would you keep her behind bars?
Well, at this point, I'm not sure what I would do. The question is whether she should have been there in the first place. You know, there are lots of young people who could be rehabilitated, and the whole juvenile justice system is founded on that assumption. Problem is that we're talking about perceptions, and when someone who's 15 or 16 years old commits a murder or aggravated assault or attempted murder, it's such a hideous offense that the public doesn't want to hear anything about rehabilitation, because what happens is that if we use the juvenile justice system for such cases, then it gives the support to the view that the criminal justice system is too soft. And that's a shame, but that's the fact. So I think there are certain cases that are beyond the tolerance for rehabilitation.
But not necessarily exemplary of what's wrong with the system. In fact, I thought what was fascinating is every kid, or almost every kid you showed, was white. And when I was in the Brooklyn family court, I had a number of white kids who were brought up, but a lot of the kids were African American, they were Hispanic kids, and what were they there for? Sometimes they were there for killing in a drug war. Sometimes they were there because they got a gun, and they were fooling around, and they ended up shooting somebody.
But I think part of the frustration, with this debate about the juvenile justice system in America is that we tend to focus on a few notorious cases, and then we generalize or we pass laws based on those cases. And what we really need to do is sort of look at the hard realities. And you know, there certainly has been an increase in juvenile crime in the last few years, but if you look at the last year, there was somewhat of a decrease, and a rather significant decrease in adult crime. So I think what we need to do is be more realistic about what approaches that we take. And Congress is now, you know, getting ready to pass legislation that would allow juveniles and adults to be housed together in jails and prisons. And that is an absolute mistake. Every correctional administrator in the United States of America, whether they're running a juvenile system or an adult system, would tell you that's one of the worst possible things you could do. You'll have 8 times more likelihood that a kid would commit suicide. You increase the odds of a sexual assault.
It's absolutely nuts. And you know why it's happening? Because in some smaller jurisdictions, the law which says you can't have a kid within sight or sound of an adult prisoner, many of these smaller jurisdictions don't have a facility that can ensure that. So some of the kids are being released early. That's why they're now passing this draconian law that kids and adults can all be grouped in together.
But we've had a policy, Geraldo, for 25 years in this country of separating the juveniles from the adults. Right. And we certainly have the resources in a country as great as the United States of America to maintain a separation in our criminal justice system of juveniles from adults. I don't think that's too much to ask of any jurisdiction.
Me either. I think it's a dumb law, and Orrin Hatch should know better. He's a good man. Here's the headline in the Record, Bergen Record. Everyone is horrified. How can you explain it? This has to do with the with Melissa Drexler, the 18-year-old prom attendee who went all dressed up to the prom, and you know, ended up having her child in the stall of the ladies' room, then dumping it allegedly in the trash can. It was alive when born, and then she came out and requested from Metallica "Nothing Else Matters," which you can read everything into that, I guess. James Curtis, is she a murderer if these allegations are true?
Absolutely. And the point about not wanting to rehabilitate these kids, I think, is an absolutely mistaken idea. The idea that people react to is the hideousness and the monstrousness and the callousness of these kinds of acts, and the idea that there shouldn't be some severe consequence for kids or adults who commit these crimes is nuts. I mean, you've got to do something. Wait, hold on. The problem is with regard
I'm for torturing Tim McVeigh to death. He's a grown-up, knew exactly what he was doing, probably cased the daycare center before he blew up and killed those 19 babies. But with all that we know now about postpartum depression and blah, 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 and the psychosis, Jack, you know, of someone who's given birth and secretly pregnant and everything else, James, you would treat her as if she were a murderer?
Yes, it's murder. I mean, you take a baby, you have a baby. The whole idea, if you don't want the baby, give it to someone, talk to someone beforehand.
But you're a kid who may not have any place to go.
Well, you may not have any place to go, but the whole idea here, the idea
but I think she may be recoverable.
This is a bad decision.
I think that's the issue.
It was a wrong decision. She may be able to be helped at some point, but this was a bad, wrong decision. There need to be some severe consequences. Now, on the other hand, the problem with the system has been, although it was designed initially to deal with kids who were doing things far less heinous than what we're talking about now, the system is not developed along the lines of the violence and the increase in the violence and the intensity that we're now dealing with, and it's not prepared to deal with it. We put all our money on the back end in terms of putting kids younger and younger in jail for longer periods of time, more quickly and more severely, as opposed to dealing with the kids when they first show signs of trouble and putting our money and our resources on that. And that's what we really have to do.
Okay, Frank, briefly, and then I'm taking a break.
But that doesn't mean you don't punish them when they do bad stuff.
No, I think you should punish them, but I think that this case has to be handled. I mean, I think Delaware, when they said that Grossman and her boyfriend were going to get the death penalty for what they did to that child, I just don't, I don't know what these people are thinking. I believe that they should be punished severely. I believe they should be incarcerated for an extensive period of time. But when a kid becomes a grown-up, then you've got to reassess whether that's the same person as the kid. Stay tuned.
You know, I don't want to be remembered as this witness person, you know. I want to be remembered as a good student and, you know, a good person. So I really would like to see them one last time. You know, I want to go to grad night.
I want to go to grad night. That's what David Cash, the witness to Jerry Strohmeyer's alleged rape and murder of the 7-year-old, says. Why would this guy do something like that? What a sick thing. But Karen was saying something in the break I thought very interesting. When she was a judge in family court in Brooklyn, crack mothers would routinely almost dump their kids.
Yeah, I mean, there was no sense at all of it being a significant event or having any responsibility for the kid. I mean, the drug was so powerful that all they wanted to do was get rid of the pain
no evidence
of the pregnancy.
No evidence here. I guess that's what's so scary. No evidence of drug use in this case. I got to take a break. I'm sorry, James. Let me do that, and then we'll come back. We have a wonderful piece on serial murderers. Stay tuned. Before I move into our serial killer segment and show you the picture of Andrew Cunanan, the most wanted fugitive in the country, I want to go to Jack Levin, professor of criminology and sociology at Northeastern. You know, Jack, you had this recent crime in Central Park. That's probably why I got so much attention. That and, of course, the 15-year-old, the fact that the perps were 15 years old. You kill a guy. All right, you kill a guy. That's one thing. But you disembowel him, you stab him 30 times, you cut his head off, you try and cut his hands off. I mean, that, to me, is going beyond the homicide, the simple homicide, if the homicide can be simple, into something much more disturbing even than the murder.
No, I think you make a good point. 20, 30 years ago, that simply wouldn't have been in the repertoire of two 15-year-old kids, even of those who committed murder. They just wouldn't know what to do there. But, you know, we've got a whole generation of youngsters who've grown up seeing it all. They've seen blood and guts. They've seen disembowelments, eviscerations, people skinned alive, decapitations. You name it, they've seen it in R-rated films, and some of them have seen it on their own cable systems. Now, I'm not, you know, it sounds like I'm blaming the media for this massive desensitization to violence, this cavalier attitude toward human suffering, but I'm really not, because, you know, the media fill a vacuum that's been left by our institutions that have gotten so weak. Our families, our schools, our religious institutions. You know, we've got to do something to repair those institutions, and then the media won't have that powerful effect.
But I don't think, I think to repair those institutions, you've got to do something constructive. And, you know, you've got to do the things like the things that are being done in the city of Boston today, where the probation department, the police department are working aggressively to prevent crime, to prevent people from being killed. They haven't had a young person killed by a gun in 1.5 years in the city of Boston. How about that? We ought to be replicating those kinds of efforts.
And that's going on throughout the country.
Good, James. We ought to hold accountable people that commit serious crimes. They should go away. They should go, in some cases, they need to go away forever. And I think that that's an appropriate response on the part of society. But of all the juvenile arrests last year, 6% of them were for rape or some other violent crime. So we've got to be realistic about what we do. We've got to understand that we're living in the information age that Peter Drucker writes so eloquently about. and let's start investing something in this next generation. And
that's right.
You know, we're simply not going to be able to build enough prisons to accommodate.
Let me get moving. The FBI today placing Andrew Cunanan on its list of the country's 10 most wanted fugitives. Let's see his picture, Grant. The 27-year-old San Diego man is suspected of slashing, shooting, and torturing 4 people during a cross-country reign of terror that began in early May. But despite hundreds of unconfirmed sightings, including several this past week in Boston, ironically, America's newest alleged serial killer remains, in the words of the FBI, armed and extremely dangerous and on the loose. At the same time, New York City's Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project is offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to Cunanan's capture. Whether or not he's guilty of the brutal crimes he is suspected of committing, we have seen a virtual parade of similar villains over the past couple of decades. We recognize their faces. They become, in a perverse way, Jack mentions the media, in a perverse way, become almost media stars. What's going on inside their twisted psyche, these people who kill and kill again? Take a look.
Why do people murder? Why did those girls murder for you? Why did Texas... They didn't murder for me. You told them... No. Come back, G.A. Come back. That's not reality. What is? No, reality is they did what they did. They're responsible for their own actions. I'm responsible for my actions. Did you tell those women to kill somebody? No.
Charles Manson has been behind bars for more than a quarter century for his orchestration of the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders. But Americans continue to find him both fascinating and repulsive. Earlier this year, he was denied parole for a 9th time. And just this week, he was found guilty of drug trafficking from his California prison cell. Another California killer, Richard Ramirez, often seemed to emulate Manson's irrational rantings and frequent threats. The so-called Night Stalker was convicted of 13 cult-like murders.
I don't even know why I'm wasting my breath, but what the hell? You maggots make me sick. You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil.
Ramirez may be right. We mere maggots, to use his filthy word, may not be capable of understanding the evil impulses that lead to the bizarre cannibalistic murders like those carried out by Jeffrey Dahmer or the Son of Sam, the shootings by David Berkowitz, which terrorized New Yorkers for months. And then there are these serial killers who seem almost rational, like the convicted hitchhiking prostitute, Aileen Wuornos.
How do you like the label of America's first female serial killer?
I'm pissed because it's not true.
But you did kill 7 men.
It's a series of men killed, but it wasn't serial killing style. I killed them, I didn't murder them.
Explain the difference to me.
Okay, murder is first-degree murder in intent, and killing is something you have to do in defense.
So are you saying that all 7 of those homicides were justifiable?
In my belief, yes.
There have been so many more of these nuts over the years. Remember John Wayne Gacy, convicted of 33 killings, Henry Lee Lucas, Edmund Kemper, Albert DeSalvo, Wayne Williams, Christopher Wilder, Kenneth Bianchi, Otis Toole, Ted Bundy, and Joe Kalinger. I have my own memories of Kalinger and his chillingly calm manner when discussing his outrageous crimes.
I'm a patient person, got a good listening ear, and try to help people.
You're patient with a good ear, and you try to help people.
Yes.
When you're not trying to murder them.
Yes.
When Joe Kalinger's reign of terror ended, 3 were dead, including his own 14-year-old son.
You murdered your own son?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
He was a sacrifice. I was to murder 3 million people on planet Earth. And he was a sacrifice to see if I could murder one of my own. At the end of murdering all the people on Earth, I was going to murder my own family and then take my own life and become God.
Oh, brother. If there's anyone who can explain the inner workings of that kind of mind, my next guest can. Robert Ressler is the man who actually coined the phrase serial killer. For 16 years, he was the profiler for the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. He was the first manager of the Bureau's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and he is the author of this fascinating new book, I Have Lived in the Monster, a report from the abyss. Have you figured them out yet, Bob?
I don't know if you will ever figure them out completely, but I've got a pretty good handle on some of them. Yeah.
Why, for instance, did Jeffrey Dahmer do what he did?
Dahmer, you know, his rationalization, his explanation was he was lonely. He was a lonely person. He had trouble making relationships. Once he made a relationship, he became a little bit happy. When the person said they had to leave, he became depressed, and that's when he decided to take their lives.
Why eat them?
He didn't have a very good reason for that. He said that he found it to be a sexual experience to eat parts of their body. He told me which parts he preferred. He said it gave him strength. It gave him a feeling that these people would be with him forever.
Roll tape I. This is Robson.
And then I did cut the arms, head, legs off, bagged each piece, triple bagged in large plastic trash bags, and put them in the back seat of the car, thinking to drive them and drop the evidence off in a ravine, 10 miles, a deep ravine, 10 miles from my house. Did that at 3 o'clock in the morning. Halfway there on this deserted country road, I get pulled over by the police. For driving left of center. The guy calls a backup squad. So there's 2 of them there. They do the drunk test. I pass that. They shine the flashlight in the back seat, see the bags, and ask me what it is. I tell them that it's garbage that I hadn't gotten around to dropping off at the local landfill the day before. And they believe it, even though there's a smell. So they give me a ticket for driving left to center, and I go back home.
He seems so matter-of-fact.
He never pulled any punches. That's one thing about Dahmer that impressed me. If anything impresses you about these people, he was very candid, and he didn't hold anything back.
Unlike John Wayne Gacy, get tape FF ready. Unlike Gacy, who continued to deny. I know Gacy was corresponding with my wife, who was at that time a producer for my daytime program, right to the very, very end. He denied it.
John never told the same story twice. It was sometimes he'd be very candid, sometimes he'd admit half of the murders, sometimes he would admit a third, and at the time of his death, of course, he said he didn't kill anybody, you know.
Nobody at all. Any idea what his motivation was?
Gacy was an individual who was just he felt like he had total entitlement to life. I mean, he did what he wanted to do. He had a preference to young males. He was married several times for cover, to provide cover to live in a normal environment in a neighborhood, but his preference was young adolescent males, and he just felt entitled. He told me specifically, he said they were human trash. Why is everybody so upset about this?
Okay, here's more on Dahmer. This is just amazing. I've never heard this before. Here's Gigi.
Did you render him unconscious with the blow?
Yes.
And what transpired after that?
Then I took the barbell and strangled him.
Okay, and then after that? Had there been sexual activity before that? No.
Because he wasn't interested.
Okay.
I was very frightened at what I had done. Paced the house for a while. I did masturbate over him.
So were you sexually aroused by the actual event of the...
By the physique. That's what
okay.
They had other suspects, and they had tunnel vision in to say, it's Gacy's house, it's easier to put everything on Gacy. The state come up with a scenario as to who did the killing, and then they just built their case around there. And as it progressed, they kept leaking stuff to the media, which made it even larger than what it was. The sensationalism grew, and it's like a snowball that you put on top of the roof, and as it's rolling down the roof, it grows and grows and grows. Well, by the time you get into about the first 60 days of my case, it is so big that nobody wants to back off of what they're saying, even if they're wrong.
Both those guys are dead. Gacy executed, Dahmer murdered behind bars. Comment, Jack Levin, on motivation in these guys?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting that the most evil deeds are not always committed by the most evil people. For example, Jeffrey Dahmer would cannibalize his victims in what I would call affectionate cannibalism.
Please spare me that effect.
I know, there are groups of people who use this as a custom where they want to preserve loved ones, and so they'll actually consume parts of the body
Enough about the culinary delights of love and murder.
You have no appetite for this.
No, I've not.
But you know,
been killed.
But look, John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, with fava beans and liver. That's what.
John Wayne Gacy, food for thought. because John Wayne Gacy was one of those really typical serial killers who killed for the power, the control, the dominance. He was a sexual sadist. I think it's so interesting that Jeffrey Dahmer would sedate his victims before he would strangle them. Now, you know, most serial killers would never do that. That would diminish the enjoyment that they get from seeing their victims suffer and scream and beg and plead for mercy.
Well, I tell you the truth, when he was murdered behind bars, I did not shed a tear. As nice as he was, as cannibals go, I was not upset.
Geraldo, can I make a point real quick?
Go ahead, James.
I just want to say, I mean, it's interesting, the juxtaposition between the first half's topic and this one, but you know, people should not make any association between what our young people are doing and these idiots, these psychopaths, these folks out here who are, this is not what happens to young people when they grow up if they've had, you know, troubled childhoods or even done heinous things. We're talking about two totally different sets of situations.
I agree. Yes?
Geraldo, that is true, and I'm glad that James said that. On the other hand, the idea that more and more of our teenagers are killing for the thrill, for the excitement, because they feel a profound sense of powerlessness, that is very similar to the motivation of a serial killer. That doesn't mean that these teenagers will become serial killers, and I think James' point is well taken. But I don't want to take these monsters and make it look as though the rest of humanity is so different, because then we wouldn't learn anything about ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think if we're going to have a serious discussion about these issues, and I think we've got to quit distorting all the realities. I mean, these horrible things have happened, but you certainly can understand why elected representatives have a hard time having a rational discussion about crime when you listen to this kind of discussion we're having here tonight. You know, we've got to focus on the real causes of crime, what can really be done to have an impact on our society.
What are the real causes of crime?
What can be done to make this a safer community?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that those guys had a real cause.
Well, I don't think. I think in a nation of 265 million people, you're going to have some bizarre, crazy, dangerous human beings. That is a reality. And unfortunately, you know, we'll see these people in the future. And I'm not certain even a program like this doesn't encourage some of that to a certain degree.
Oh, God forbid.
Well, I think
but the thing that we have to get to, the thing that we've really got to
look at the notoriety somebody gets thanks to the coverage they get.
Yeah, but that's a cop-out.
Then Frank Hall, you should boycott these programs.
The idea here is, and the point that started off to be made was a good one. We simply got to put more time, more energy on the front end with the causes, with the issues, with our kids, giving parents more time and tools to do good things with their kids and positive.
I have lived in the monster. A report from the abyss. I want to show him his picture again. Andrew Cunanan, wanted for at least 4 homicides we know about in let's see, it was Minneapolis or Minnesota, Chicago, New Jersey, and where was the other one? I guess it was 2 in Minnesota. Andrew Cunanan on the list of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. What's his motivation? Any idea?
He's really what you call a spree killer in my definition, in my book. He's an individual who's kind of at the end of the road. He's had life stress problems that have kicked him off into really it's a suicidal type of trip he's on. He's on a spree, a murder spree. He's somewhat similar to the type of person that goes off in public and just starts a mass murder event. But this guy's on a it's kind of a mobile mass murder.
He's doing a good job of ducking the authorities unless he's killed himself someplace.
It's surprising he's gotten away with this long.
Andrew Cunanan. If you know anything about him, call your local 911 or the FBI. There were closing arguments today in the Timothy McVeigh trial. Now it is up to the 12 jurors, at least 7 of whom looked directly at Timothy McVeigh today. They, of course, must decide between a life sentence without parole or death by lethal injection. Here's NBC's Roger O'Neill with a report.
Turning away from the jury and looking at McVeigh, prosecutor Beth Wilkinson said, "Look into his eyes and tell him he is not a patriot. Tell him he is a traitor." With his hands hiding any reaction, McVeigh listened as Wilkinson charged his crime is so despicable, so horrific, the only just sentence is death. "It's time," she said. "It's time for justice." Jurors were told, when you put McVeigh's good past on the scales of justice, it's a mere pebble to the pounds of destruction and death he caused. Defense attorneys looking for that one juror who will say no to the death penalty came to court today with a different agenda. Richard Burr told the jury, choosing life over death doesn't mean you excuse these crimes. It only means you found compassion. McVeigh's other lawyer, Stephen Jones, said a life in prison means his client can never escape what happened in Oklahoma City. And Jones said maybe McVeigh would someday tell the rest of the story. But he said, dead men don't tell tales.
The jurors might well want to hear the rest of this conspiracy, but it's unlikely they're going to vote for life simply because they wonder if Tim McVeigh will ever talk.
As McVeigh left the courtroom to wait for the jury's verdict, he smiled and waved at his mother and father. The jury, on the other hand, was somber as they left. While all have said they could impose the death penalty, jury consultant Joellen Demetria says it's different now.
Originally asked that question, it was a theoretical question. Now, they are the ones that have to live with their decision, and the emotional drain on each one of those jurors is absolutely phenomenal right now.
During jury selection, 6 of the 12 seemed more comfortable with the death sentence than the others. Juror number 9, a property manager and one of the 7 men, said it's warranted if there was an intent to kill. The government today argued McVeigh tried to kill as many as he could. The defense hopes the holdout for a life sentence will come from one of the 5 women members of the jury. Number 4, the oldest and a grandmother, said it would have to be proven to me that a person would have to die.
I'm satisfied that we've done everything that we can do, and we'll leave it in the hands of the jury.
As always, the last word came from the prosecution. Joe Hartzler saying, "Your decision calls for courage. Do not let terrorism triumph." The jury's verdict is only a recommendation, but the judge promised them he would impose their life or death sentence. They have adjourned for the day and will resume deliberations in the morning. For Rivera Live, this is Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Denver.
Roger, thanks. Before I get to David Gregory, briefly, Robert Ressler, they say that patriotism is sometimes the last refuge of the scoundrel. Can he really have believed that by killing all these people that he was in some way advancing the cause of a nation he professes to love?
Well, see, a guy like this is basically a paranoid type personality. He's probably a little bit of a psychopath, and he's got this belief that he is going to be remembered as something, being a martyr, of course, is not impossible for this guy. He is believing he's working for a higher cause, and that he's a soldier, and he's doing something very noble.
Beth Wilkinson had it perfectly right. He's a traitor and a coward. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Tyler Eves was just 8 months old, but his family says he fit into the clothing of a baby 3 times his age. His mom, Maya, says he loved bananas and reading, really listening to the sound books, Lion King and Farmer in the Dell. He loved attention, Maya recalls. He wanted to know that you were paying attention to him. Tyler also liked to play in his swing, splash in his bath. He enjoyed pulling off his right shoe and sock over and over again. Tyler had been attending the daycare center in the Mora building for just over a week when Timothy McVeigh blew up his bomb. Remember tonight, Tyler Eves, Oklahoma City bombing victim 55 of 168. So the jury will decide whether the death of Tyler Eves and the 18-year-old and the 18 other babies and all the other victims justifies Timothy McVeigh being put to death. David Gregory joins us right now. And David, I'm very interested in this moment when the prosecutor, Beth Wilkinson, turned to McVeigh and spoke directly to him. What was that like? What did she say?
Well, it was a dramatic moment, and it was also important because the notion of courage was central to this closing argument. The idea that he's been held up as a good soldier, she said, is really, she implied, is just ridiculous. Because the truth of the matter is the way he carried out this crime was cowardly. He picked innocent people who were defenseless, he planned it, he waited for them to be as vulnerable as they could, and then he ran away. And what she was telling these jurors and showing these jurors, I suspect, was that you have to now look at this coward, look at him in the eye and tell them that you will show him what courage is. That you can look him in the eye and look at him and acknowledge that he's a murderer, that he's pathetic, and that he's a coward, and that you, on the other hand, can stand up with the moral voice of the community that you now own and tell him he deserves to die. It goes back to voir dire, too, Geraldo, because this notion of a general discomfort that people have looking somebody in the eye and saying, I'm going to condemn you to death. I think Beth Wilkinson wanted to have them all do it together and make the point that she could lead by example. She could look him in the eye, and the jurors could too. Look at him for what he is, look at him for what he did, and then, with no problem at all, say that he should die.
Is it, as the Associated Press is reporting, that his face got red when she called him a coward and his eyes narrowed?
And he avoided eye contact with her. He just sort of looked toward the spectators, didn't look her directly in the eye. But I think it was important for her to tell jurors, it's okay. you can do this. I can do it, and you can do it. Let's do it together. Let's take a few moments, because they're going to have to do it at some point. If they decide to condemn him, they're going to have to come back, look him in the eye across that courtroom, and feel good about what they're doing.
James Curtis, are they going to do it?
It's a good likelihood, but that's a very, very risky strategy for the prosecution to take.